r/NoSleep. Posted by u/rydenanne. I used to watch the people in the apartment building across the street. Now I really wish I hadn't. The last time my girlfriend ever said anything meaningful to me was when she said, "You just don't make me happy anymore." Figures, she chose right after I lost my job to break it off and leave me in this huge apartment by myself. When I had my job, and when we were together, we could afford this place. High-rise on a street full of different high-rises. All the works. Of course, now that she was gone and my job let me go, I couldn't even afford to pay the internet bill. I thought about maybe going back to my parents' house, but I knew that it would set me back even further. They live out in butt-fucking nowhere, and since I bike everywhere, it kind of eliminates all job options. At least here, I could try to get a job and then pay the rent that I owed. I didn't know what I was going to do about the rest of the necessities though. It took a few weeks before shit kind of started to fall off. The internet went first, then my phone afterwards, and the TV. I sat on the couch then, staring off into nothing, realizing how much of our lives are made up of those three things. I didn't really have anything else to do, so I started just staring out the giant, floor-to-ceiling windows. At first, there wasn't really much to look at. Across the narrow street was an identical high-rise. Each apartment had the same large windows as my own. Some covered with curtains, some not. I found myself intrigued as I realized that I could actually see what a lot of the people were doing. That's how I started people watching. Most of them were boring. Watching TV, having small get-togethers. My phone's camera served as binoculars as I watched people live out their lives. I even moved my couch as close to the window as I could without anyone noticing. There was really only one person that drew me in. I lovingly started calling him Sticky, based on the fact that he was really thin and his apartment along with himself were filthy. After a few times of watching him mope around his apartment, I realized that I recognized him. I had seen him leaving his building around the same time I left mine a few times in the past. The dude was dirty, and he always looked really sad. I wanted to feel bad for him then, as I watched him every night stumbling around and tripping over shit, but I had my own demons to worry about. It's fucked up, but his anguish was my entertainment. The first time the escort showed up at his apartment, I didn't immediately realize what was happening. I had never seen anyone visit Stumbling Sticky in the past. No family, and no friends, definitely no pretty girls. I didn't catch on until I saw him hand over a huge stack of cash. What ensued was not pretty. Not because of the girl, but because of how awkwardly he moved around her. I hate to say that I watched the whole thing, but I did. Not with sexual desire or even entertainment, but it was like a car accident. Boy was it awful, but your eyes were locked onto the scene. After she left, he seemed a little happier, at least for the rest of the evening. He didn't stumble over shit. I even watched him straighten up his apartment a little bit, but he was back to the same routine the next day, though the slightest bit brighter. I was completely intrigued by this. I don't know why, it's not even a big deal, people pay for sex all the time. It was just weird for him, I guess. I didn't even know the guy. I don't know what I'm getting at here. Anyway, she started showing up every Friday after that for a couple of weeks. He'd hand her the money, and she would do her job and do it well, despite his awkwardness. I noticed over time that he seemed a little bit happier. He slumped his shoulders a little less. I guess I became so into this, I started even rushing downstairs to watch him leave his apartment, seeing a new pep in his step. Only a day or so ago did things go bad. I really wish I didn't see it. She showed up, as always. I waited for the cash handover, getting ready to avert my attention. By then, I was mostly interested in the changes to his personality afterwards. I didn't care much about the sex, just the ways it helped him. Instead of handing over the usual stack, he shook his head. I watched as he put his hands ever so gently, but still awkwardly, on her shoulders, leaning in and attempting to kiss her. She turned her head away. I think she spoke, probably to tell him something like no cash, no ass, and started to walk towards the door. An awkward, lanky arm grabbed for her hair and Sticky pulled her back hard. I think he realized what he did, because he let go, allowing her to fall on the floor hard. I was thinking about heading down to the front desk and using their phone to call the cops when she stood up more gracefully than I expected. She stared at him, calm, and said something I couldn't make out and honestly still couldn't tell you exactly what it was. She then opened her mouth likely as wide as it would go. He stared at her, confused and a little scared. I zoomed my phone's camera in as far as it could go as I watched the sickly, coral-colored tentacle thing emerge from her throat. I blinked, making sure my eyes weren't tricking me, as it finished its grand entry into the open air. The thing was long, and it swayed back and forth, almost like it was looking him over. She stood there, her hands at her sides, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling as the coral thing twitched. He opened his mouth, maybe to say something or even scream, but that's when the thing darted at him and entered his mouth and started running itself down his throat. He seemed almost like he was going to fight it, but I watched as something dark traveled from her, into the tube, and into him. His hands fell to his sides and he stared blankly at the ceiling just as she was. My hands shook to the point where I almost dropped my phone when she blinked, and in almost an instant, the thing backed out of him and returned to her. She looked around, and I expected to see evil in her face, but instead there was fear. He stood there for a second, his mouth still open, eyes still staring blankly, before he too returned to normal. A little too normal. His shoulders slumped even further than they'd ever been. He sleepily retrieved his wallet from his pocket, and shelled out a stack of cash 3 times as big as normal. Instead of strutting out coolly as she usually did, she hurried away, slamming the door behind her. I set my phone down, not at all believing what I had seen, but knowing that I had seen it in real time. I truly didn't know what to do, so I did all I could. I shut the curtains. I crawled into bed. I ran the scene over and over again in my mind, looking for an explanation, before finally falling into dreamless sleep. I woke up the next morning to sirens. I opened my curtains to see if there was anything out on the street, but I saw something else instead. Where the glass in the large window of Sticky's apartment was, there was a hole. Later, I would learn that he committed suicide. He broke the window with a chair and just jumped out, landing on a car below. I started at that gaping hole in the window for a few minutes before I heard a knock on the door. Great, someone knew I was watching and just had to come add more to my horror-themed plate. However, when I opened the door, no one was there, but there was an envelope with my apartment number on it sitting on the ground in the middle of the hallway. I silently kicked myself in the ass for being a curious person as I grabbed the envelope and returned to my apartment. I sat down on the couch and flicked on the table-side lamp. Pausing, I wondering if I really wanted to see what was inside. Of course I did. The first thing inside was money, and a lot of it. More than enough to pay off all my back bills and last me for a few months, even in this expensive joke of an apartment. There was also a note, written in shaky black pen. Stranger. I'm sorry that you had to see what I did. I didn't want to. I really didn't. Please don't tell anyone what you saw.